Most people see it before they decide to get rid of it. It appears in the lawn between one weekend and the next, a bright yellow flower standing where there was only grass before. Some reach for a tool right away. Others kneel down and pull it out by hand, making sure to get the root. A few spray the area and check back later. The goal is the same in every case: remove it and prevent it from coming back. That plant is the dandelion. And across most of the modern world, the response to it is nearly automatic. But for most of recorded history, the response was the opposite. People grew it intentionally. They carried seeds of it across oceans. They stored it through winter and prepared it in kitchens alongside food they had paid for. It was not a nuisance. It was a resource. One reliable enough that families depended on it when other things ran short. So here is the question this film will explore. How did a plant useful enough to transport across the Atlantic become something people now spend time and money trying to eliminate? Some knowledge was never lost. It was simply waiting to be remembered. In this film, we trace the dandelion from its origins in Europe and Asia, through the deliberate hands that brought it to a new continent, into the kitchens and herb gardens where it once held a quiet but important place, and into the present moment, where it grows everywhere, unbothered, still waiting to be reconsidered. The plant everyone recognizes. There are few plants more familiar and less examined than the dandelion. Taraxacum officinale grows on every inhabited continent. It appears in lawns, in city parks, along roadsides, in sidewalk cracks, in the margins of fields, and in gardens where it was not invited. It is one of the first flowers to open in spring and one of the last to disappear in autumn. In cold climates, it sometimes pushes through snow. Most people know two things about it: the yellow flower and the white sphere of seeds that replaces it. Children blow those seeds into the wind. Adults watch them drift and land in the wrong places. For most of its modern history in North America, the dandelion has been defined by what it disrupts. It breaks the uniformity of a green lawn. It competes with crops and garden plants. It returns after being cut, pulled, and sprayed. It survives conditions that kill other plants. That resilience, which would have been valued in almost any other era, became the very thing that made it unwelcome. But the dandelion did not arrive in North America by accident. It was brought here deliberately by people who understood exactly what it was. Why Europeans brought it. When European settlers crossed the Atlantic in the 16th and 17th centuries, they brought practical things: seeds for crops, tools for building, knowledge for surviving in unfamiliar land. Among those seeds were dandelion seeds. This is documented in early colonial records. Settlers from England, France, and the Netherlands included dandelion among the plants they wanted to establish in the New World. Not as an ornamental plant, not as a curiosity, as a useful one. To understand why, it helps to understand what the dandelion meant in Europe before it crossed the ocean. In medieval Europe, the dandelion was a plant of practical importance. Monasteries cultivated it in herb gardens alongside other plants used for both food and medicine. Herbalists wrote about it. Physicians recommended it. Cooks prepared it. Many medieval monasteries maintained herb gardens where plants like dandelion were carefully cultivated alongside other medicinal species. These gardens functioned as early centers of botanical knowledge, preserving practical plant medicine through centuries when written medical knowledge was limited. For centuries, plants like dandelion were not weeds. They were part of everyday survival. The leaves were eaten as greens in early spring, when they were tender and before other vegetables became available after winter. This timing mattered. In a season when stored food was running low and gardens had not yet produced, a plant that emerged early and reliably from the ground had genuine value. The roots were also used. Roasted and ground, they produced a dark, bitter drink used as a substitute or supplement for coffee and other imported beverages. This preparation persisted in European households for centuries and continued in North America during periods when trade goods were scarce or expensive. The flowers, too, had uses. They were fermented into wine and used in various preparations throughout the growing season. Beyond food, the dandelion occupied an important place in traditional herbal medicine. It was used as a digestive tonic, prepared to stimulate appetite and support digestion after illness or during periods of poor nutrition. It was associated with liver support, used in preparations intended to encourage the production and flow of bile. Healers across different European traditions documented these uses, and the plant's reputation in this area persisted long enough to be studied in modern research. The Latin name Taraxacum officinale reflects this history directly. The word officinale designates a plant that was officially recognized in apothecary practice, a plant kept in stock for medicinal preparation. This was not a casual classification. It indicated that the plant had an established role in formal medicine. When settlers decided which seeds to carry across the ocean, the dandelion made the list because it had earned a place in the systems they were leaving behind, and because they expected to need those systems again. The plant itself. To understand why the dandelion survived everything that has been done to eliminate it, it helps to understand what it actually is. The plant grows from a deep taproot that can extend 12 inches or more into the soil. This root anchors the plant against pulling and allows it to access moisture and nutrients below the surface layer that most shallow-rooted plants depend on. When the top of a dandelion is cut or removed, the root remains intact and produces new growth. A root fragment left in the ground will regenerate the entire plant. The leaves grow outward from the center in a flat rosette, close to the ground. This growth pattern allows the plant to press through grass that would otherwise shade it out. The edges of the leaves are toothed in a distinctive pattern. In French, the plant was called dandelion, the tooth of the lion, a description of the leaf edge that eventually became the word dandelion in English. The flowers open and close with the light. They are among the earliest sources of pollen and nectar available in spring, which has made the dandelion important to pollinators at a season when most other flowers have not yet opened. After the flower matures, it closes briefly and then reopens as the familiar white sphere. A seed head composed of dozens of individual seeds, each attached to a delicate filament that catches the wind. A single plant can produce several thousand seeds per season. Each seed can travel considerable distances on a light breeze, and once it lands in suitable soil, germination can begin quickly. The plant is not particularly selective about soil quality. It establishes itself in compacted ground, poor soil, and disturbed areas where other plants struggle. This is not a weakness. It is a form of competitive advantage that has allowed the dandelion to persist in nearly every environment where humans have settled. These biological traits, which make the dandelion so effective at spreading and surviving, are the same traits that made it valuable to people who needed a plant that would keep growing under difficult conditions. Food and nutrition. The dandelion is edible in its entirety. Every part of the plant, from root to flower, has a history of use in kitchens across many cultures. The leaves are the most commonly eaten part. Young leaves, harvested in early spring before the plant flowers, are mild in flavor and can be eaten raw in salads or cooked like other greens. As the season progresses and the plant matures, the leaves become more bitter. This bitterness was not considered a flaw. In many traditional food cultures, bitter greens were specifically valued for their effect on digestion, And the dandelion's bitterness was part of what made it useful rather than a reason to avoid it. Nutritionally, the leaves are notable. They contain significant amounts of vitamins A and K, as well as potassium, calcium, and antioxidant compounds. Vitamin A content in dandelion greens is especially high. A cup of raw dandelion leaves contains several times the daily recommended amount. These are not trace amounts. They are the levels found in vegetables that are marketed today as nutritionally exceptional. The roots have a different flavor profile. Raw, they are firm and somewhat bitter. Roasted slowly at low heat, they develop a dark, earthy taste and can be ground into a powder used to brew a beverage that resembles coffee in color and some aspects of flavor, though without caffeine. This preparation, known in various forms as dandelion root coffee or dandelion root tea, was widespread in Europe and North America and is still available today in health food stores. The flowers are edible as well. They have a faintly sweet, slightly grassy flavor and can be added to salads, battered and fried, or fermented. Dandelion wine, made from the flowers, has a long history in British and European folk traditions and was made regularly in rural households through the 19th and early 20th centuries. Traditional food preparations involving dandelion appear across cultures that had no direct contact with each other. In parts of southern Europe, dandelion greens are cooked with olive oil and garlic in preparations that have remained largely unchanged for generations. In China and Japan, species related to the common dandelion have been used as both food and medicine for centuries. In North Africa and the Middle East, similar preparations appear under different names. This convergence is not coincidental. It reflects a plant that, wherever it appeared, was recognized as useful by people who were paying close attention to what grew around them. How it became a weed. The reclassification of the dandelion from useful plant to unwanted weed did not happen in a single moment. It happened gradually, as a series of changes in how people related to the land around them accumulated into a new consensus. The ideal of the perfectly uniform grass lawn emerged in earnest in the United States in the middle of the 20th century. Post-war prosperity, expanding suburbs, and the marketing of lawn care products combined to establish a particular vision of what a yard should look like. Green, even, uninterrupted. Any plant that was not grass was, by definition, out of place. At the same time, industrial agriculture was consolidating around a small number of crops cultivated in monocultures. Single-species fields managed with herbicides, pesticides, and standardized inputs. In this system, plants that appeared where they were not intended became problems to be solved rather than resources to be used. The entire category of the weed was, in a sense, a product of monoculture thinking applied to every landscape, including domestic ones. Herbicides designed to eliminate broadleaf plants from grass lawns and agricultural fields were marketed directly to homeowners and farmers in the 1950s and 1960s. The dandelion, being a broadleaf plant that grew aggressively in disturbed soil and returned after removal, became one of the primary targets. The knowledge that the plant had other uses did not disappear entirely. It survived in the margins, in the practices of foragers and herbalists, in old cookbooks, in family traditions that had not fully modernized. But it became minority knowledge, held by a smaller and smaller segment of the population as the mainstream cultural consensus moved steadily toward removal. This shift did not require any deliberate suppression. It required only that the economic and aesthetic systems that came to dominate everyday life had no place for a plant that grew freely and required nothing. In a food system built around products that could be packaged and sold, a plant that appeared on its own in the lawn was simply irrelevant. The quiet return. The dandelion never actually went away. It continued growing everywhere it had always grown, as indifferent to the cultural shift against it as it was to poor soil and cold weather. What changed, beginning slowly in the late 20th century and accelerating in the years since, was the number of people willing to look at it differently. The foraging movement, which gained significant visibility in the 2000s and 2010s, brought renewed attention to edible plants that grew wild in urban and suburban environments. Dandelion appeared consistently on foraging guides and in the work of writers and educators who were documenting edible plants for general audiences. For many people, it was the first wild plant they had ever considered eating, partly because it was impossible to miss. Chefs working with wild and foraged ingredients began including dandelion greens on menus, often positioning them alongside other bitter greens in dishes that had Italian or Mediterranean influences. The plant's culinary credentials, which had never fully disappeared in some European traditions, were being rediscovered by a new audience. The herbal medicine community had maintained continuous interest in dandelion root and leaf throughout the decades when mainstream culture had largely ignored the plant. Research into the plant's bioactive compounds has produced a body of literature examining its traditional uses in the context of modern science. The findings, while not conclusive on all claims, are consistent enough to explain why the plant retained its reputation across such a wide range of cultures and time periods. Interest in resilient food systems, in plants that grow without significant inputs, and in reducing dependence on supply chains that proved fragile during the disruptions of the early 21st century also brought renewed attention to plants like the dandelion. A plant that grows freely, requires no irrigation, no fertilizer, and no pest management, and that produces edible material across most of the growing season, occupies a different position in a conversation about food security than it does in a conversation about lawn aesthetics. What the dandelion remembers. The story of the dandelion is not unusual. It follows a pattern that appears repeatedly in the history of plants that humans have used and then stopped using. A period of recognized value, a shift in the systems that defined value, and a reclassification that replaced one understanding with another. What makes the dandelion story particularly clear is how visible the plant remains throughout. It did not have to be rediscovered because it was never hidden. It continued growing in every environment, where the people who had once valued it were now trying to remove it. The knowledge faded, but the plant endured. The settlers who carried dandelion seeds across the Atlantic understood something that would become harder to see as the centuries passed. That a plant which grows without help, which provides food in early spring, which supports health in practical and documented ways, and which returns reliably year after year, is not a problem. It is an asset. That understanding did not disappear. It moved to the margins, held by foragers, herbalists, traditional cooks, and researchers who continued to find the plant worth paying attention to. And from those margins, slowly, it is being reintegrated into a broader conversation about what grows around us and why it matters. The dandelion itself has not changed. One plant, carried across an ocean, now growing in the lawns that try to remove it. It flowers in spring as it always has. Its roots go deep. Its seeds travel on the wind. It grows in the cracks where other things cannot. Only the way people chose to see it changed. And that, too, can change again. If you are drawn to the stories of plants that shaped human history, plants that fed, healed, and sustained people across generations, the Living Archive explores those stories one at a time. Subscribe to stay with us as the archive continues to grow.